Hello, everyone. Every doctor has at least one story they never forget. Some are beautiful, some are challenging. Most of the stories in healthcare are actually never told. Welcome to HUMED, where we talk about the emotional, moral, and human realities of medicine. And I'm Dr. David Spiro. Thank you all for being here today. I'm incredibly honored to have a close friend and colleague joining us, Dr. Saurabh Gupta. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. I appreciate you asking me, and it's a pleasure to be here and chatting with you this morning.
Great. As an introduction, Dr. Gupta received his medical degree from Maulana Azad Medical College in Delhi and followed that by residency in internal medicine at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital, where I'm from, in New York City, Columbia University. And during that time, he served as a chief resident, which is a prestigious honor. And then he completed fellowships in cardiology and then interventional cardiology at the University of Utah School of Medicine. He was recruited as faculty at Oregon Health and Science University, which is where we met in Portland, Oregon, and was the section chief of international cardiology and the director of the cardiac catheterization labs at the medical school. He established and directed one of the earliest and most prominent transcatheter heart valve programs on the West Coast in 2011 and was program director for the interventional cardiology training program. And currently he serves as the chief of cardiology for the St. Charles Health System, which is on the east side of Oregon, and a professor at the Elsa S. Floyd School of Medicine at Washington State University. Dr. Gupta is also an internationally renowned physician leader with deep expertise in clinical trials, first in human studies, and the development of a transformative clinical program, especially in his work in India. He has had significant contributions abroad, and his work encompasses educational and clinical initiatives, particularly in cutting-edge, minimally invasive heart procedures. He's also the founder of LifeMech, a nonprofit organization that developed a low-cost FDA open-source ventilator during the COVID-19, and is the co-founder of and CEO of CorMetrix, an AI-driven medical technology startup, which I'd like to talk a little bit about towards the end of the show. Reading your CV and your background, it's just, we're friends, but it's just incredibly impressive, the work that you've done in the short amount of time you've been practicing post-residency, and it reminds me what an incredible honor it is to have you on the show.
Thank you, David, for that generous introduction, and some of that is actually even true. Uh, I feel really lucky and blessed to have had the career and the life that we've had. I mean, surrounded by good friends, and I count you towards the very top of that list. And honestly, a fulfilling career where we help patients and populations and people. And fundamentally, I think that's what it's all about.
Yeah. So I'd love to get into the story. Tell us a little bit about the story that you would like to share with our audience today.
Of course. So as you noted, one of my clinical focuses in medicine. So just a little background for your listeners, that when somebody becomes a doctor, they have various paths that they can move forward, and that leads to a fellowship program. So I did my fellowship in cardiology, and then further subspecialization. And I like to joke clinically, I'm an inch wide and a mile deep. And my expertise has been in these transcatheter therapies, and transcatheter really means that we can now do a lot of procedures, a lot of surgeries just through really small openings in the groin. These are called transcatheter, and traditionally aortic valve surgery, which is to essentially change out the old aortic valve, which is one of the main heart valves, was done via open heart incisions, several days in the ICU, several days in the hospital, at least 6 to 8 weeks of recovery. And about 2011, 2012, we were on the cutting edge of doing these procedures where essentially technology emerged to be able to do these through the groin. And that procedure is called transcatheter aortic valve replacement, or TAVR for short. And pretty quickly, my team and I, we became the thought leaders in that on the West Coast and nationally as well. And we were doing a lot of these, right? As patients became more aware, as doctors became more aware, and we were quite busy. And so the story that sort of resonates with me is about 6 or 7, maybe 8 years of doing this, where other people still considered it highly innovative, whereas for us it was standard bread and butter, except very busy. And one of the procedures one day that I did was with this delightful French gentleman. He was about 98, 99 years old. He was the oldest living graduate of University of Toulouse. And he asked us before, say, "Am I too old?" He said, "Because I feel young in spirit." And and we said, "No, you're totally appropriate candidate for this. I think age is just a number. It's a chronology." And he was obviously far healthier than many 75 or 70-year-olds even. So the procedure goes fine, and a few hours later, he is in the recovery area, just telling dirty French jokes to the nurses and making them laugh. And I walk in, and it's about 7:30 or 8 at the end of my day, as I'm sure as you are aware that most of us who do medicine procedures always like to check in on our patients and our folks before we go home for the day. So I walk into his room and he says, "Hey, how come? Is something wrong? Why are you here?" And I said, "No, I haven't left yet." And I like to check in and make sure that everything's going okay before I step out. So he says, "So have you had dinner?" And that was such a strange question that I've never been asked by a patient. I said, "No, I haven't yet, but I will." And then he said, "Well, come sit here." So I sat by his bedside. And that moment is etched in my memory, crystal clear, on this rather diminutive old man, but very young of spirit. And I'm sitting there by his bedside, on his bed, actually, because, the chair was just so arranged. And he pointed. And I said to me, number one, I appreciate all that you did for me. You've given me a new lease of life. I feel so much better. I don't know how much time I have. And he taught me two concepts that day that still stay with me. Concept number one, and these are his words, not mine. He said, at my age, and perhaps at any age, it's not about adding life to my years, excuse me, not about adding years to my life, but it's rather about adding life to my years. And I already feel better. And then I said, "Okay, that's fantastic." And I said, "Then the second thing I'm going to tell you is something that I will teach you, which is that when you are my age, or maybe even younger, you're not going to remember how many of these procedures you did and how many of these patients you helped. Of course you will, and they'll be meaningful. What you're going to remember is the dinners that you missed with your family. And if you ever find that you're missing dinners with your family more than occasionally, that means something in your life needs to recalibrate." And that was just such a powerful
Mm,
lesson in the impact that we had as a team on his life and the impacts that he had on my life. Because that did force me to re-examine on how to prioritize what was really important. My kids at that time were both in middle school. I believe our eldest was just starting high school. And that was exactly right. He clued on to that I did not make most dinners home. And I did not make most breakfast, and I did not make most school drop-offs.
mm.
So that story has always stuck with me. I followed him for a few more years after that, and then obviously as he became older and older, he got more frail. But it just has stuck with me since.
So let's go a little meta here. When you think about all the incredible things that you've done in your career, and you also have raised two beautiful children that I had the honor to and pleasure to be a part of their childhood through squash and through community at the Multnomah Athletic Club, um, and they've gone on to achieve phenomenal things in college and graduate school. When you look back when your children were in elementary school, middle school, high school, and you were being a dad. Do you see your role of being a parent something that's more important than being a physician and all the different things that you've done? Where do you weigh those values? Because sometimes medicine takes something out of us. As an emergency physician, I work evenings, and there have been times where I've been unable to be around my family during holidays. I still worked Thanksgiving this year, and so it was not a great Thanksgiving for me. But where do you see medicine and family life in terms of your priorities, looking back at your time now that both of our children are now out of the house?
It's something that is not obviously as not obviously as clearly demarkable as one would think, right? I mean, there are competing priorities here in a way. I mean, certainly being a dad and being a spouse are one of the most important things that we do, but it's also helping other people. And the kids asked me, said, "Dad, you've accomplished a lot, and but you had this expertise that is internationally valued and renowned. You could help a lot more people. Why would you choose to step back or cut back on medicine when you're so uniquely talented and experienced and gifted?" And I think it's a question of competing priorities. They're not less important or more important. Having said that, I've never ever regretted spending a single moment with my kid. So if that helps put some perspective on it. And medicine is, as you said, is hard. It's grueling, but when done right, is the most rewarding profession, I believe, in the world. It's its unique ability to help people and see the impact is very powerful.
Right. You also, if you don't mind me sharing, you are in a family where your wife is also a cardiologist and doing some incredible things in the community. So um, I imagine there have been times when it's just been challenging with the demands of her work and your work and trying to figure out how to balance that with supporting children where my understanding is you did not have an extended family in Portland, Oregon, to grandparents, et cetera, around all the time to support things for the kids.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, my wife is an accomplished cardiologist, and in fact, you and I both know she's the better cardiologist in the family. But we can leave that unsaid, but it is true. That's exactly right, right? School pickups and drop-offs, and even more than the physical aspects of it, the emotional aspects of it, which I learned, which I think is actually a learned principle that most young doctors and healthcare professionals should aspire towards, is that after you've worked long shifts in the ER or me in the OR, you can be physically present, but you're emotionally absent sometimes. So you could be at a dinner table, but you're mentally exhausted or physically exhausted. And I think that is a learned skill that I've certainly gotten better at, is to be more in the moment, to be more emotionally present. But that was a learning experience for me. It was not very natural.
And I appreciate that. So I'd like to get back to the case and the story that you described about this 99-year-old gentleman that had this procedure. One of my close friends has a parent who's in her 80s and has a few stents and is having gallbladder issues. And uh, it's a complicated decision and when and under what circumstances to have an operative procedure, a laparoscopic procedure at the age of 88. What, for those folks who are either not in medicine or early learners, what are the risks of having a procedure like this at the age of 98 versus the age of 58?
I think, as modern medicine has evolved, our ability to understand and impart judgment and insight and wisdom has grown in general. In fact, that's the founding thesis behind CorMetrix too. And as I mentioned, age in my mind is just a number. There's certainly, so I could give you a bookish answer, which says, well, you have to look at the risk and you have to look at the benefits. And if the benefits are higher than the risk, then it's generally worth doing. But if you go to this in a more holistic way, fundamentally, it is a multifactorial decision. And even though we treat the individual, we are really treating the family unit. What are their dynamics? What are their social dynamics? So, for example, in two different scenarios where somebody has just even one or two people who they're close to, taken care of them after a procedure, common sense and our experience tells us that the odds of them doing well and recovering faster and better go up astronomically. And in modern medicine, far advanced as we are, those types of nuances are not that easy to capture. I mean, you can look at CT scans, you can look at their body weight, you can look at their lab value, but holistically, that tells only part of the story. I mean, certainly you've shared several examples with me where the data told you something else, but your intuition told you something else altogether on whether that was an interaction between a parent and a child, or whether it was an interaction between a neighbor who brought that child in. Uh, and so to the 88-year-old, I would say that it's worth a conversation. Don't make it about the procedure. All procedures have consequences, both good and bad. And then step back a little bit from the 500-foot level, because it's easiest for us, believe it or not, intellectually to do the procedure. It's harder to step back and take a wider view on the social domains, the emotional domains that allow something to be successful, right? Like at a fundamental level, if you say, what is medicine? And medicine is the art of making people feel better. Uh, and
Very wise. That's a very wise. I want to hold on to that because I sometimes think we lose that. That is such a wise statement.
and so I try to approach that. Now, obviously, in modern medicine, that's not always strategy that is effective. Patients come back and say, hey, it's a gallbladder procedure. Okay, maybe I should just go get it. Like if you have something that can be fixed with a procedure, then maybe that's a good thing, but it's not always a good thing. Uh, Having said that, age in itself would not bother me that much. I think there's certainly several 88 or even people in their 90s that have very successful outcomes after procedure. But then uh, on the other side, there are also people in their 40s and 50s that are actually
It's interesting.
not great candidates. So it's a very nuanced decision, and I think that's where the art of medicine comes in. So we should always keep in mind to keep the art of medicine at forefront. The other part of this is that everybody wonders about what the impact of AI is on the practice of medicine. And contrary to what most people think, I do think that the science of medicine is the easier challenge to solve. Yes, you could have AI look at labs and give you trends. Yes, it could tell you what all it could be, obviously with constraints, and they're not always right. But the art of medicine, the art of human touch, the humanism behind medicine, and making people feel better, adding more life to your years. Now, that is a skill that I think we are probably decades away from AI being able to master.
It's interesting because that is one of the questions. One is artificial intelligence going to replace all of us on some level? And I agree with you. I think it's decades away. I want to keep getting back to this case again. You had shared with the story that you actually sat on this man's bed, and I get a sense just to have an intimate conversation with him and be close to him physically during the conversation. We oftentimes learn in medical school about having a healthy distance between our patients, and we're the doctor and we're objective. observers that are supposed to analyze the science and then make decisions based upon that. And I'm curious, I assume you don't sit on everyone's bed post-procedure. I'm curious, in this story, what made you want to sit in his bed and have a more close experience with him? It sounds like both physically and emotionally.
Yeah, so you're absolutely correct, right? In modern medicine, in general, people talk about professionalism, and I've some thoughts on that, right? So let me unpack that thought, and then I'll get back to your actual question. I do think that we, as healthcare professionals, sometimes, not always, can hide behind the veneer of professionalism to depersonalize patient encounters. Whereas for a patient in generally, healthcare is a very personal experience, pretty much always exclusively. They are suffering. So it's by definition an intense personal experience, right? I mean, as of now, modern medicine is in treatment rather than healing per se or making feeling better. So that's true. And when I teach young physicians, young residents, nurses, fellows, I try to say, hey, try not to depersonalize the decisions. Uh, Try not to leave with the impression I don't really care because I'm objective. You have to care. And when you stop caring, when that sense of caring goes away, then I think it's time for you to look at another profession. So don't depersonalize encounters. And it's not the good or bad. It's just that you recognize that you've reached that stage in life where you might not have more of you to give, which is okay. There's nothing bad or harmful or shameful about it. I think the bad part is to not recognize that. And that ties into these broad themes about, well, what is burnout, or how much of you as a healthcare professional do you give? For this particular patient, I think in general, you're following the patient's cues. So, there are cultural context, right? He's the sort of guy who will actually come and, in true French style, give you a kiss on the cheek. He will just reach out to you and he'll give you a kiss on the cheek. In this particular encounter, he's a rather small, was a rather small person, so there's plenty of space on the bed. And he just took my hand as I went in, and then just tell me to sit by, where his legs are. So it was, even though it was on the bed, it's not physically very close, and certainly, I think it didn't feel to me, for sure, and to him, I think that you were in the space, and that's the concept. That are you in somebody's personal space? Whether they invited you in there, and what is that interaction like? I actually do think that there's nothing more powerful than sitting at a patient's bedside and holding their hand. If it goes back to that uh, concept of making them feel better. And certainly, I think you've had several kids that you've taken care of. You're struggling. And I remember a story you told me on the squash court a few years ago where you were able to do a procedure on this young kid without much anesthesia, that you were just essentially comforting them and holding their hand. And that to me is a very, very powerful emotion, and scientifically valid too, right? Like, I mean, pain pathways and comfort pathways work through the same brain receptors at some level.
That's very interesting. I'll just share briefly with the audience. I had a very similar experience. You mentioned holding someone's hand, and that struck me because I made a diagnosis of leukemia in a child, a very severe form of leukemia, where a child presents with a very high white blood cell count. And the diagnosis itself was not difficult to make based upon the child's presentation. However, when I had to give the family news, they asked me to pray with them. And as a nice Jewish boy, I typically, this is not something we normally do in that moment. And they asked me to um, kneel down in this quiet room, and we all held hands. And there was a chaplain there, and there were some things that were said, and we were in a small circle, and it was one of the most powerful experiences I've had in my career. And when I look back at it, being there with the family and having them invite me into their prayer circle was way more important than actually making the diagnosis. Obviously, making the diagnosis set that up, but it was actually the engagement with the family that was the most meaningful thing to me, and continues to drive me in the last third of my career towards continuing to practice clinical medicine, because it is those patient encounters and those patient experiences that are beautiful. And the story that you told is such a beautiful story, especially considering, and interesting considering, his age, and immersing the cultural aspects of it all, and the general feel for what is okay and what's not okay. I'd like to pivot a little bit. You've done so many different things in your career, and you're still a practicing, actively engaged um, clinician. Are you still traveling to India? Are you still flying out and doing work internationally?
Less so, David. As we've gotten busier with CorMetrix, that's really been taking a majority. You can't even say majority, pretty much all of my time. So less so. But the background of the India and other international stories is that as this technology for replacing heart valves through the groin became more and more mainstream from an idea in just in 2011. I mean, it's not that long ago. So in 2011, 2012, this did not exist. And by 2019, most of the surgeries for aortic valve replacement in the US were being done this way. So for something to go from 0% to greater than 50% adoption across a complete market is just remarkable. And part of it was the sense of giving on, okay, how do you then teach this technology around the world so that other people can practice it safely? And I like to tell to my teams before and even now that, make all the mistakes, just don't make the ones that I've already made. Because when we learn, we sometimes will learn through bad experiences, and what works, what doesn't work, right? Like you can only use simulators and judgment and insight so much. Fundamentally, when anything new starts, you are learning. And so that motivated me to go back to India and to see how these skills could be translatable, that they don't have to start at the ground level. They could start at the third floor, the fourth floor. And I did that even across the US as well. Hospitals in Arkansas I haven't been to, but pretty much all the states where I've been to where these programs were being started, and I was helping those teams do their first procedures. So that was meaningful and powerful, but also very time intensive. And as the technology has matured, there's less need for to do that just for this particular procedure. But yeah,
Well,
I
I'm
did
sure,
I did enjoy it quite a bit.
but I'm sure on some level, the idea that you grew up in India, you went to medical school in India, you've been incredibly successful on so many different levels here in the US, and then having the opportunity to go back to your country of birth and to give back, to teach these important, frankly, life-saving skills from an interventional cardiology standpoint, must have been feeling, there must be a sense of fulfillment and reward that is hard to describe. Did you get that sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was a very, very powerful emotion to be able to walk somebody through. And in a way, it makes me realize I didn't play up. I mean, I played lots of sports, but I didn't really play professional sports. And it sort of gives you the feeling of what it would be like to be a high level professional coach, where you're talking to your players, obviously with medical licensure rules being what they are, you can't really touch a patient, right? And touch a patient as in you can't participate in the procedure in a direct way. And you're talking them through. You're talking them through eventualities. You're talking them through when things are not perfect. Obviously, their skill at that procedure is still uh, uh, an early learner. Otherwise, they wouldn't need somebody like me there. And that was an interesting skill set. So I could totally see why some of the best coaches are maybe perhaps not the best players.
Well, I mean, I'm now a little bit confused, because I thought when we were playing squash together in Portland, Oregon, that we were playing professional squash. I thought that was,
Yes, I think there were bleachers in their own minds for sure.
Um, so I want to talk a little bit because I've had an incredible opportunity to start a company or two, and through the roller coaster of that, and now you've continued to evolve, and you've gone from practicing and continue to practice clinical medicine to teaching innovative procedures that are now standard of care nationally and internationally. And now you've gone to a different way to affect healthcare, and that is through the mechanism of building a company. So I would love to hear a little bit about the genesis of CorMetrix and how it evolved. I have a sense it may have pivoted over the last few years as well, and what you're trying to bring to the market right now.
Yeah. So I think at a philosophical level, obviously, it's the sense of amplifying our impact beyond one patient at a time, one family at a time. That how do you then use the skill sets that you have to amplify that impact? Second, my core belief that domain expertise, domain presence is a key factor in successful technologies. And what I mean by that is that as physicians and healthcare professionals, we are ideally positioned to solve some of the biggest challenges in healthcare. I mean, I remember your own journey, you're an inspiration where you had the blood oxygen sensors. And then your second company was about how do you impart what you've learned to other people uh, in the medical education industry. And then the third was how do you simplify this whole process of medical data to an electronic health system that works, which is a huge time sink. It's not a solved problem, it's a hard problem. And so it fundamentally stems from my belief that we at the forefront of medical medicine are the ideal people to be solving these types of problems. And then the second core thesis was that how do you impart a learned experience of judgment, wisdom, and insight? I mean, those are not easily teachable skills. You could teach somebody to take a blood pressure. You can teach somebody to do a procedure even. But how do you go back to that goal of what procedure should be done, what shouldn't be done? What is the medical data telling you? Why do you, when you walk into a room with the same data set, uh, come to a different decision than perhaps some other physician might, or perhaps some other not even early learner, some even an advanced learner comes out, right? What defines a good doctor from a bad doctor? And are those teachable skills? And as technology evolved, we started looking at the application of artificial intelligence to augment human judgment. And I don't like the word artificial intelligence as much. Rather than AI, I think of the medicine technology universe as CI, or collaborative intelligence. So how does artificial technology collaborate with human wisdom, judgment, and insight? And that those are exactly the types of problems that we're solving at CorMetrix. And at a fundamental level, we take medical data, and then I could go on technical on you because I'm now half an engineer. My team thinks I'm three-quarters of an engineer, but they still won't let me write code. So I have to figure that out. But taking this medical data that is messy by nature and incomplete and duplicated by nature, and then applying collaborative intelligence to that such that you can derive meaningful, actionable items from that. And then there are several use case scenarios that we solve. So the current use case scenario that we're solving right now is taking the data in from medicine, and then as one of the key concepts in medicine, and then as it interfaces with the legal profession, is the basic outlook that we should be getting better as a society, as medical practitioners. And there are peer review processes where we are introspective, and then sometimes when patient harms happens, then there are legal processes that protect the patient, and for that matter, all of us, right? Like one thing's for sure, that all of us will be patients at some point in life. And so CorMetrix does exactly that. And I have a very talented team that works around me who understand this space very deeply. So we can now take medical data at a personal level, at an institutional level, and by applying technology to it, essentially impart judgment, wisdom, and insight into those data sets such that you can act on that information rather than look at information in the abstract. That's a 30,000 foot level view. But if your listeners are interested, I'd encourage them to check out our website. I think we'll post the link in the description, but it's coremetrics.com.
Well, that is fascinating. I wanted to, you had talked about this concept of collaborative intelligence, and is really collaborative intelligence, isn't it really more the next step? We have human intelligence, then there's machine learning intelligence, and then this next step and what you're trying to do in CorMetrix is combining both in a way that is synergistic. Would you say it's more of a linear growth that we will all move towards that? Because I have a sense that the next stage of machine learning or generalized intelligence will really support the way that we make decisions on a moment-to-moment and day-to-day basis, but we'll still be in control of making those decisions, but there'll be some augmented or collaborative engagement versus a Google search, which is where we sort of started on this journey 10 or 20 years ago. What is your sort of meta perspective on that?
So David, the advancements in technology have been mind blowing, right? I mean, this field is innovating and moving so fast. Especially we at CorMetrix are we're right at the cutting edge of this, and some of the techniques that they're using did not exist. They fundamentally did not exist 3 months ago or 6 months ago. So that's how cutting edge we are. And from something that didn't exist to actually use it as an application is very powerful. Uh, there are certain problems that AI or CI, if you want to call it, is uniquely positioned to solve even now. So, for example, we've known since the match between Gary Kasparov, the chess match between Gary Kasparov and Deep Blue in the 1990s, that at some of the patent recognitions, computers were already better. And we're talking, I believe that match was somewhere in 2004 or something like that, right? And then machine learning, deep machine learning, neural network analyses, those were all evolutions of that same concept. So when you start thinking patterns are easy for machines to teach and recognize. They can spot those very easily. You can train them very easily. And then that means that radiology, for example, let's say you were looking at a nodule, that's easier than other tasks, or if you're looking at a pathology slides. Now, it's also humbling to say that about 3 or 4 years ago, the conversation was radiologists are going to be replaced with AI, right? That they say, oh, AI, especially not even just with AI, but even with the precursors to AI, neural network analysis, they're so good at pattern recognition. But here we are. There's still a huge shortage of radiologists because where these technologies still lack is putting the whole picture together, for sure, lacking putting the humanism together. I mean, your podcast is human, but even then, a patient is far more than just an audio. And I think that's what leads me to believe take a bet on humans rather than take a bet on AI. For sure, AI will get better, but I see this field evolving more towards where human judgment and wisdom gets amplified, not replaced. And some of the easier tasks get far more easier to do. Let's say, in early days of my career in the 1990s, 2000s, when we were presenting or when we were looking at patient data, we could actually we actually would go down to a spreadsheet and put lab values there, right? What is this patient's blood counts, for example, for the last 2 weeks? And here you could now generate that in 15 seconds, not even. So the point I'm making is that obviously we're far more sophisticated than that, but to actually put that thing together is a much harder problem. And the next frontier, of course, with all of these is the procedural medicine space on when do you actually trust an AI or an automatic system to actually operate on the human body. I think we're still some ways off from that.
Because we will be living with synthetic, robotic beings at some point that will be able to perform household chores and or ultimately medical procedures that as this develops. I know we scratched the surface. I want to have you back again for so many different reasons, but it was an incredible opportunity to reconnect with you as a friend of mine that I spent so many years playing squash with and connecting with on a personal level. And you've done so many amazing things in your life, and being a wonderful husband and a dad to two beautiful children, to really trying to change the way that we think about the entire meta practice of medicine. And I'm just I'm impressed with everything that you've done, and I think our audience is really going to enjoy hearing this conversation. So, huge honor to have you on the show today, and let's have you back on the show in 6 months. I want to find out how CorMetrix is doing, and I know that you have more stories to tell too. So.
No, David, it was such a pleasure talking with you. I mean, I've enjoyed our conversations through the years, and this was such a joy. So thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it.
Well, we'll wrap this up. Everyone, please subscribe to us on YouTube. We've had a recent increase in the number of subscribers, and we really appreciate that. You can also listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to these kinds of episodes. And hope you all have a great rest of the day.
Thanks for listening to HeMed with David Spiro, MD. If you like this episode, make sure you're subscribed on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast platform. The video versions are also available on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell there so that you never miss a future episode.